everybody. I'm so happy to have you join us. I'm here for me. It's late at night. For Philip, it's in the morning. So these dialogues are with people all over the place. And our guest today is Phillip Lindsay, who I've followed for years. He's got this incredible newsletter that comes out every month. And I'm going to go through his bio for a minute, and then all of his stuff is on esotericastrology.org. So anything you want, his books, his videos, his writings, he has several books, are all on esotericastrology.org. So Phillip Lindsay has been a student and teacher of the ageless wisdom and esoteric astrology for over 30 years and is the author of several books. He has presented his work at many spiritual institutions and esoteric education groups around the world, touring extensively since 2001 as perpetual traveler and global citizen. Currently, Phillip's main method of disseminating esoteric astrology and the ageless wisdom is through his monthly newsletters, received via email subscription and or accessed on esotericastrology.org. And most past newsletters are in all of his publications. He's also available for international visits and conducts webinars regularly. Phillip is available for personal, soul-centered horoscope consultations that are recorded and sent to you as an MP3 file over the internet. So welcome, Phillip. I'm so happy to have you here. I haven't seen you like in 20 years.
It's been a long time, yes. The last time I saw you was when you dropped me off at LAX to catch my plane.
No, I think we went, no, I saw you later at Arcana. You
right. Okay.
I talk at the Arcana, Tom Carney's thing.
Yeah. By the way, I meant to say that the website URL is esotericastrologer.org.
Oh, it's okay. Esotericastrologer.org. Okay.
If you Google my name, it will come up anyway.
Yeah, because I just put your name in and it's all there. And I want to say one other thing before you begin on the esoteric. The hidden history of humanity, which you're going to talk about today, and maybe some esoteric astrology. But he has the best video of the hidden history of humanity. It's 2.5 hours long. It's beautiful. And it's just as like it goes at a pace where you understand everything. Nothing's hurried and everything is like visuals are magnificent. It's great, Phillip. How long did that take you?
Well, I wrote the script back in 2012, and my video editor in LA said, we've got to get this together. And but I got so busy traveling for about 5 years that it wasn't until 2016, I think, that my video editor said we've got to get this out, and I said yes, agreed. So we worked in a studio in LA and did the recording, all the interviews and so forth, and the sound and all the rest of the polishing, and we got it out in 2017, which coincided with the release of my updated book, the original book, The Hidden History of Humanity, which came out in 2005. And that has been renamed now Unveiling Genesis, Mysteries of the Root Races and Cycles. And that is the companion book if you want to dive deeper from the video.
Okay.
It's a good start. And there are a couple of 10-minute, 18-minute trailers that you can look at if you want to, before you dive into the 2 hours and 37 minutes.
I thought this is something you could watch and watch again, and just, all of these different ancient sites and all of the visuals are just incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people say that they've watched it 20 times, and I'm amazed and grateful, because this is the nature of the ageless wisdom. There are many, many layers in it, and the more you go through it, the more that you can that you can pick up that you missed the first time.
Exactly. Okay, so you want to begin and
where does one begin? I mean, esoteric history is based upon the writings of H.P. Blavatsky and the Secret Doctrine, and also Alice Bailey's work via the Tibetan master Dwars Kulp, but primarily based upon Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine, which of course was transmitted to her by the Masters of Wisdom. And she makes a hint in that book that history should be studied from the angle of the first 6 chapters of Genesis. And that really tweaked something in me, and I followed that up. And basically that's why the book is called Unveiling Genesis, Mysteries of the Root Races and Cycles, because the entire history of humanity, esoterically speaking, interpreted correctly, is in those first 6 chapters, and in other various books in the Old Testament too. But of course, that wasn't my only source. The Vedas, the ancient Hindu Vedas, and other mystery traditions I've drawn upon. But and Blavatsky does that very well in the Secret Doctrine. She synthesizes many different strands from cultures all over the world. So and in esotericism, we talk about the history of the solar system, let alone just this Earth. So we have a big picture perspective, and Blavatsky, of course, talks about the different globes and chains and, if you like, incarnations of this planet over an immense period of time within the greater solar system, which also is on its own evolution. So I'm just briefly touching upon this just to give people a sense that there was an even greater picture. But essentially, the hidden history of humanity is about offering an alternative timeline to history. At the moment, it's pretty much been boxed into a short history of around 6,000 years based on the exoteric interpretation of the Old Testament. That, of course, that figure is being brought back continually through modern science and alternative historians to anything from a couple of 100,000 to a few million years. But essentially, consciousness on this planet, in this iteration or incarnation of this planet, currently started around about 21.5 million years ago. I have some very exact timelines that have been given by these various masters through Blavatsky and Bailey.
Is this like a lot of this from Hindu texts, or?
I was able to use as markers for determining the timelines of the unfoldment of the consciousness through the root races, such as Atlantis, Lemuria, and this current root race that we're in now. And yes, a lot of those timelines are in the Vedas and in the Hindu teachings. So essentially, around about 21.5 million years ago, is a very exact figure we've been given, actually. Humanity at that time were pretty much known as animal humanity. They were part of the animal kingdom. They didn't have any higher consciousness. And they were gigantic beings and are also androgynous. Okay. They didn't have 2 eyes. They had 1 eye at the top of the head. And essentially what occurred was this period of individualization that is related to the planet Venus within our solar system. And there was a certain appointed cycle, if you like, that came along where within the planetary plan, within the plan of the entire solar system, that where humanity would be brought to an awakening, where the future humanity would be brought to an awakening. And so these great beings, which I try to describe in the video, called the Lords of Flame that are associated with Venus, but not technically from Venus. They're from an evolution within the Earth scheme, as we call it. Okay.
Mhm.
Or the Kamaras, as they're also called, 108 of them to be precise, and there's another important number from the Vedas.
Mhm.
Came to this planet and basically created an electrical field around the planet that resulted in what we call the implantation of the spark of mind in humanity.
I didn't quite get that. Can you say that again? It was a little muted, what you just said.
Was that, Carol?
Yeah,
Which bit was that? The last bit?
just your last sentence. It just faded.
They basically implanted the spark of mind in humanity through this great electrical storm that
Wow.
was created. And that storm, and who knows, it may have gone on for several centuries or even thousands of years, but it was responsible for the death of the dinosaurs. And that's another good marker because current science posits that took place about 60 million years ago, when it actually took place much earlier, much later. And so there was the death of the animal form, including the ancient humans of that time. But what actually this paved the way for was for all those beings to come back into incarnation again, but with this spark of mind or soul, if you like, at the appropriation of the causal body or the soul body. And that was the beginning of human individualization. And this took place over a period of 3 million years, this period of individualization from about 21.5 to 18.5 million years ago. And there are various groups of souls that are based upon the 7 ray groups that I talk about in esoteric astrology. Some of them took to individualization very quickly. Other ones had to have the spark fanned a little bit, to like you try and start a fire. But essentially, what occurred in that 3 million year period was not only the consolidation of the spark of mind and consciousness, but also the division of the androgynous beings into 2 sex beings. So gradually, instead of self-reproducing as they did before, the processes of birth took place as they do today through male and female. And this was back in the root race, the so-called third root race, Lemuria. There were 2 root races before that, but they were more in the etheric and the subtle realms.
Mm.
Yet those particular 2 first root races were responsible for building the etheric forms, the templates, if you like, upon which the physical forms of the third root race were based upon. And so the forms of the beings in the third root race at individualization were gigantic. They were like, according to Blavatsky, she draws a parallel with the 5 Buddhist statues of Bamiyan in Afghanistan that she says were constructed by the initiates in ancient times to reflect the actual physical heights of the giants of those root races. And so in Lemuria, we're looking at, would you believe, 20 meters or 60 feet.
But are those still in Afghanistan? They haven't been damaged?
1 or 2 of them were damaged by the Taliban, I think, back in 2006 or something like
okay.
that. But anyway, so we're talking about incomprehensible,
Right.
fantastical, or something of a sci-fi fantasy here.
Mm-hmm.
However, the memory of giants is very strong in the human collective memory. And essentially, the giants of that time were as big as the dinosaurs and the T-Rexes and so forth that were still around despite the decimation of the reptile kingdom at the time. And in fact, we're told in the secret doctrine that humanity of that time actually battled against these monsters. but it wasn't a matter of a Jurassic Park kind of scenario where the human being is 2 meters or 6 feet tall, and the monster is 20 meters or 60 feet tall.
Right.
They were approximately the same size.
Wow. And
so
didn't they find footprints, and have they found any other evidence?
they've found, there's many examples have been found, but we're jumping ahead a bit here.
Oh, okay.
I'll try and take us through a sequence if you like.
Okay. No, I was just wondering, like, that's so amazing.
And so this was the origin of the great titans, which is a huge thought form or idea that we still see today in the modern movies and so forth, of these gigantic beings that have perfected strength, and this went on as the consciousness was refined to the giants of Atlantis, the next root race, which overlapped the Lemurian root race.
Mm-hmm.
And the Atlanteans started to overlap, in fact, fairly soon after individualization, about 17 million years ago. But they were a different root race apart. They had different type of consciousness and ray conditionings and so forth. But they both lived in parallel for about 10 million years before the Lemurians were finally extinguished about 4 million years ago, if you like, which I describe in detail in my book and a bit more detail on the video. So, so as the consciousness evolved, the bodies, which were kind of quite clumsy and gigantic at that time, became far more refined. And so by the time at the peak of Atlantean evolution, the bodies were not only refined, smaller, probably about 10, 12 meters high, if you can get your mind around that.
Meters, not feet. Wow.
30, 40 feet, okay. Wow. Were not only more refined, but had greater consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And had developed consciousness. And here I also talk about the two streams of souls that are on Earth, the so-called moon chain humanity and the earth chain humanity.
Mm-hmm.
The earth chain humanity were those who incarnated in Lemurian times. The moon chain humanity came in later in Atlantis. They had to wait, if you like, for the earth chain beings to catch up in consciousness. Now, here we go into a fairly esoteric area, but I just want to briefly explain it to you. Within the Earth chain, there are 7 globes of evolution. The previous globe to this Earth globe that we're on now is called the moon globe, and the moon chain. I'm confusing it already. But essentially that evolution was closed down, if you like, or was deemed inappropriate by the being we call the solar logos, who is the being who presides over this entire solar system. And the souls of that time, which included the one we know as the Buddha today, were held over in a kind of a transition state for a very long time, until they have the opportunity to come back in on this earth chain that we are on now. So we are in a very unusual situation in this world period, because we have the blending of two streams of evolution, the moon chain far more advanced in intellect, and we can see a lot of examples of moon chain humanity on this planet. In some ways more spiritually advanced, but not necessarily always. And we're seeing the coming together of these two streams in this age of Aquarius that we're going into now, where a lot of the old moon chain karma is also being worked out. Has been worked out for the last 20 million years, in fact.
Wow.
The abuse of power at that time required the system to be shut down, so to speak. Excuse me. So just to briefly touch on that, so don't be too confused, viewers. You'll get more clarification if you go to the video and the book after that. But just to mention that, and so in fact there were conflicts between these two races, the Lemurians and Atlanteans, for many millions of years, literally. But the first building of cities and monuments and temples and so forth occurred in ancient Lemuria, and their remnants are scattered around the world, as are the old remnants of Atlantis. And I'll go a bit more into this in a minute, but suffice to say, the fledgling humanity of that time in Lemuria had certain guides of the race to help them to kickstart the race, if you like, to teach them about agriculture, how to build, fishing, all those kind of things. And so they were led, but also the first temples of initiation were established at that time by the guides of the race. They weren't wasting any time because of the failed moon chain evolution, if you like. And so those who were ready for initiation were presented as candidates for initiation, even way back when, in those ancient times. And an initiation, of course, is about the expansion of consciousness. And but of course, we all have to initiate ourselves into that expansion of consciousness, where we finally do receive the confirmation of that self-initiated effort, and we receive that in a formal ceremony, the rod of power, if you like, that confers and affirms that expansion of consciousness. So even back then, initiation was taking place, but humanity was at a point of understanding that we hardly have any sort of understanding about how we think today. It was a very primitive form of consciousness. Okay, it was just, there was also, because of their recent incarnation, there was also a connection with the spirit world that was very strong. And so they had in many ways awakened intuition, third eye vision, and so forth. Two-eyed vision didn't actually come into the race till about 17 million years ago, I say in my book.
Wow. Where
gradually souls were being born with two-eyed vision. And for a while there were three eyes. And the one eye at the top of the head, which is usually depicted in the third eye area, that's probably incorrect. We do have a third eye in this area, of course, or the Asana center, the Asana chakra, but it was at the top of the head. In fact, that eye receded back into the brain over a period of a few million years, whilst the two-eyed sight grew out of the brain and physically changed the entire face. I'm not sure exactly what the whole face looked like at that time, what the nose like and but I think it's been incorrectly depicted with the eye on the forehead, but I could be wrong, but that's, I'm taking that information from Blavatsky, who tells us that the eye was in the top of the head.
There's some like lizard that have that, like they talk about it being related to the pineal. Yeah.
That's right. The Tuatara lizard from New Zealand is an ancient remnant. New Zealand is an ancient remnant of Lemuria, as is Australia. As was the whole Pacific, all the Pacific Islands right across to the Americas. The west coast of the Americas is pretty much at Lemurian remnants. California, Bolivia, Peru, all those places. But there are also parts of Atlantis too that overlapped that, because the continents were sinking and being raised over that period of time. But even today, when we see when the fontanelle is not in a young baby, we can see that pulsing
Mm-hmm.
and that closes over. So we get these ancient memories in the physiology, in modern physiology. We see the ancient evolution there. So during this transition period between the Lemurian root race and the Atlantean root race, the consciousness really picked up very strongly, particularly in the second subrace of Atlantis. There are 7 subraces for each root race, 7 branch races for each subrace, and you have this really diverse expression of consciousness and development of various faculties.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until the second subrace that the moon chain souls started to come in large numbers. It was deemed appropriate that their time had come for coming back into incarnation, and so with this incredible stimulation of intellect, which the moon chain souls had, that really was a big stimulus for the development of technologies in Atlantis, culture, arts, many different kind of things. But still, the population was still gigantic. Easter Island, we're told by Blavatsky, the statues on Easter Island are about 30 feet high. And she said that was indicative of the heights of the giants at that time, about 4 million years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, today we see these excavations of those heads on Easter Island that reveal a body, a complete body. Which is another fascinating.
Wasn't there? They posit that there was more gravity then. Everything was bigger. Like we've lost gravity and we can't support those big bodies anymore.
Interesting, yeah. I think this is one of the theories about the ancient Lemurian giant bodies that were sort of perhaps semi-ethereal and had less weight at the time, but they certainly became big, heavy giants eventually when they solidified. Mm-hmm. But this also points to some of the ancient technologies of rendering the atoms weightless in the large stones that they lifted into place and were able to carve and match together perfectly in the walls in Cuzco, for instance, in Peru, in Bolivia. Because of the ancient sound technology that they were able to use to render those atoms within the stones weightless. The ancient mantras and the ancient magic, which was much abused, and so all those formulas were withdrawn from humanity, like a child having a box of matches taken away from it by the parent.
Mm-hmm.
But what actually happened in that sort of, we're talking millions of years here, leading up to about 4 million years ago, was that the Atlantean civilization developed to an extraordinary degree. And Atlantis wasn't just in one place, it was scattered all over the world. You see a lot of reports where people claim to find a lost Atlantis. Mm-hmm. And yes, they're correct, but it's not just one place. It was right across the Atlantic Ocean. It was most of the eastern portion of the United States and the northeastern portion of South America, plus various islands and island continents scattered across the Atlantic. It was on the western portion of Europe as well. It overlapped into Spain, into Portugal, into North Africa, all those kind of places. And my next book, which is in this series, which is planned, is called Geography and Giants, where I try and track the changing of the continents over a long period of time, which we've also been given hints about in Blavatsky's writings, where those maps overlap and what places they were inhabited and so forth. And we are told that in this coming 6th root race, that a lot of these submerged continents will arise again, and we'll find ruins and clues and monuments upon them that will give us more information about the old Atlantean period. So this sixth root race is beginning now, and one of its first main areas will be the what we call Brazil today, but will probably involve Brazil, Peru, Bolivia in the future, and that will be one of the first outposts, if you like, or sub races of the sixth root race.
So that's where everything, the focus, there'll be like the center where all of the energy will.
That will be the first sort of outpost, yeah, and of course to remember that there's different energy or consciousness being planned to unfold in each root race. We're currently in the fifth root race now. If we count the Lemurian root race as the third, the Atlantean root race is the fourth. We're in the fifth root race now, or the so-called Aryan root race, which is a word that comes from the ancient Hindu scriptures, of course, meaning noble or noble one. And we are in the fifth subrace, I point out in my work, of this fifth root race. This fifth root race came into being about 4 million years ago in the more subtle realms, but manifested physically about 1 million years ago in India. And all the Western races are actually derived from that first subrace of the Hindu subrace of the Indian continent. And all our languages, in fact, are derived from that, from Sanskrit. That's another way of tracing the evolution of consciousness through language, which is something that I'm planning in the distant future somewhere. But so in this fifth root race, we've been developing the manas or mind, and in this fifth subrace or the fifth branch race of the fifth subrace of the fifth root race, which I refer to as the 555, we've reached the epitome of the expression of lower mind, not higher mind as such, but lower mind is distinguished from higher mind. And the Anglo-Saxon race, Germanic, British, is a good example of this fifth branch race, fifth subrace, fifth root race consciousness. And so this is the seed. We are at this point now of going into the sixth branch race of the fifth subrace of the fifth root race. And this sixth branch race is the seed of the sixth root race. Well, it's the seed of the sixth subrace of the fifth root race, which is the sixth root race. Okay, and in the sixth root race, we'll be developing intuitive consciousness, or the energy of buddhi, which is direct knowledge. And of course, we're all intuitive to some degree already, but that intuition will completely bypass or use the mind as its vehicle eventually in the sixth root.
Because we'll be going into a sixth sense, and then in the fifth we've had the five senses, right?
The senses certainly correspond to the root races, as do all the septenaries actually, the seven chakras, and so forth. So, but what actually happened in Atlantis was there was an abuse of the God-given powers. Humanity had been given a lot of gifts by the guides of the race. Masters of wisdom walked amongst humanity at the time. And it came to a point where the masters of wisdom who are not allowed to interfere in human evolution, they have to allow us to make our own dumb mistakes, had to draw a line in the sand and say, this is the way of light. This is the way of materialism. Humanity, make your choice. And this created the great schism of the time, which is told in the story of the Mahabharata, where two Hindu families are ranged against each other. And we have characters such as Arjuna and Krishna and so forth involved in the story. And that is a literal story of the great conflict that took place 4 million years ago. 4 million. It's hard to get our heads around that because of our cultural conditioning about dates and cycles and chronology and so forth. But that's what I propose in my video and in my books, that was the timeline. And it was also the seed of the fifth root race was born at that time. the fifth subrace of Atlantis was the seed of the fifth Subrace, just as I explained about the sixth before. And so what we had at that time was the cream of human evolution that were depicted in this Hindu family, versus the rest of the extended family that were basically caught up in materialism, black magic, selfishness, all those kind of things. And of course, we keep repeating those things way down all the way down the line.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, what happened at that time, Carol, was that those forces of materialism actually triumphed. Okay, and the masters of wisdom who watch over humanity were forced to withdraw from human contact and watch over them right up until today. But the planetary plan has stated, and this is why we're in such an amazing period right now, that the Masters of Wisdom, or the Great White Brotherhood, if you want to call them that, are due to re-externalize amongst humanity. And in my reckoning, this may happen within the next 60 to 80 years, but it may even happen much sooner.
I couldn't hear how long you said. How many years?
The next 60 to 80 years.
Oh, okay. You got muted there. Okay.
At the latest. A lot of us are hoping it's going to be much sooner, but what's occurring right now is that the hierarchy, who are watching over humanity always, are watching and waiting in this planetary purge that we're going through for everyone to stand up for themselves, to exercise their discernment and their discrimination. There are testings, very subtle testings going on here in terms of human discrimination, in terms of humanity reclaiming their power, because essentially that for about 4 million years, even though human evolution has gone to great heights and many people have become liberated, initiated, and left human evolution, these powers of materialism have held sway over humanity. And we're at the point now where the hierarchy are planning to re-externalize. In fact, they're going to be making their decision in 2025 at the once-in-a-century conclave with the Lord of the World, the being we call Sana Kamara, to choose a date of when they're going to come back into incarnation. And that's why I figure 60 to 80 years at the latest.
I see. That
this will occur, because what has to happen is that all the disciples and aspirants of the world have to pave the way for them. Mm-hmm. All the members of the various ashrams on the inner planes have to make way for, pave the way for the reappearance. And we talk about also, of course, the reappearance of the Christ, the being that holds the office of the Christ, which is a similar position to the Buddha, mm-hmm. but not the same. In fact, the Christ works with the Buddha. And in a sense, the passing of the torch from the Buddha to the Christ, who will take over the role that the Buddha has held for many, many years. And this also represents a fusing of the moon chain and human earth chain evolutions, or the beginning of that will take place over the next 2,000 year cycle in Aquarius.
So we're almost at an hour.
Already, this first part one of 2 parts. We'll do another recording to finish this discussion. So we're talking about we're going from the past, the ancient past, to the future, and what is planned to unfold. So essentially, what has been going on in the last century is a recapitulation of the Atlantean conflict in World War I, World War II, and what I call World War III. We're having a war on the mental plane in terms of ideologies right now. and we are under full-scale attack from materialistic forces. There's no question about this. For anyone with the eyes to see and the ears to hear. And this trilogy, if you like, of global conflict, this is, I think, the third and final phase of the Atlantean conflict, because it was as I said to you before, the forces of materialism triumphed back then in Atlantis, that forced the hierarchy to withdraw from human contact. Now that they're returning into physical contact with humans, with humanity, they will be recognized by humanity, and they will take positions in society, and will be seen as leaders spiritually and otherwise. So what we're going through now, the forces of materialism know that there's going to be a conclave, the once in a century conclave between the Lord of the world, the Masters of Wisdom, and the Great White Brotherhood in 2025. And that's why, particularly since
close.
2016, I've noticed very close, too close for comfort in many ways. That's why since 2016, but really the last few decades, they've been planning to throw everything to thwart, basically, the hierarchy's decision, and to try and enslave humanity, just as the Nazis did in World War II.
It's so literal. We see it every day here with our pandemic and everything.
Yeah, and so what we're seeing, what the difference between World War II and World War III is, that there was no definable enemy. There was an easy definition of the Nazi enemy in World War II. But that fascism now has spread all around the world through all nations and through many, many leaders. And this is another talk we can have, actually. So we can not go into that today so much, as to the hidden history of humanity. But just to touch on that for now, if people want more detail, they can read my newsletters on my website. So this is where we find ourselves right now. We are at this incredible juncture of history, on the cusp of the Pisces, on the age of Pisces, the age of Aquarius, on the cusp of two ray cycles of the outgoing sixth ray of devotion and idealism, and the incoming seventh ray of ceremonial order or magic. And on the cusp of civilizations, of the fifth root race and the sixth root race. We're right in the middle of all that right now. And of course, approaching 2025, the conflict, inner and outer, may get much worse before it gets better. But essentially, I think the battle has been won. It's just a matter of time of how long humanity wants to prolong the agony. And it's their decision, because they have that karmic free will to make that decision, to stand up for themselves. So, so just touching upon the present time and the future for now, I could go back to fill in some more gaps between now and Lemuria. There are several things I could mention, but perhaps we can save it for the next session, Carol.
Yeah, let's do that, because this is so interesting. So everybody's got a flavor now of the whole thing. And then we could just go back in and fill in some of the gaps. And it's perfect.
And also, some of your viewers may get a chance to look at some of my writings and the video.
And then watch the video. Because then, you've kind of got this, and then when you watch the video and it's so visual, it just puts it all together. Yeah. And
I think you may get some good questions that they send you as well. That
exactly.
So let's do that.
Okay. So this was great, Philip. Thank you for all your wisdom. And now you're in northern Spain, and we found you there. So anyhow, okay. So we'll follow. This will be part 1, and we'll continue with part 2.
All right then.
And esoteric astrologer, right?
esotericastrologer.org. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.